I'd like to introduce our first storyteller, Aubrey. Aubrey comes to us from West Point, y'all. She's serious business. I mean, come on, who y'all, right? West Point. From 2003 to 2007, she attended the United States Military Academy at West Point, from West Point, New York. She got her Bachelor of Science in French and Spanish with honors, and she made Dean's List, distinguished graduate, and in the top 12% of her class. 2013 to 2015, Indiana University, Kelley School of Business from Bloomington, Illinois, or Indiana, sorry. There is a Bloomington, Illinois. I didn't make a mistake there. With a Master of Business Administration, and 2014 to this year, also Indiana University, Kelley School of Business in Bloomington, Indiana, Master of Science in Marketing. So this lady knows her business. Okay? She served from 2003 to 2011, 2012, got it, and had worked at Walmart for a little bit, and then Mars Inc. I mean, come on, M&M's? I'll let her tell her story now. Thank you.
So, as the story goes, decades ago, when my mother was in labor with her first child, my father was in the hospital waiting room, because back then, waiting room, pacing. And he said that every so often he would hear a baby cry out in the maternity ward, and he was waiting to find out if it was his. But then he heard one baby that was shrieking particularly loudly, and he thought, ooh, I hope that one's not mine. And it was me. And I've been loud and vocal from the start, and little did he know I was the first of his 2 baby girls, so he was outnumbered from the get-go. I was raised by 2 wonderful, loving parents. My father was a career Army officer, so he was born and raised in southern Indiana, went to West Point, did 23 years of service, and his father was a farmer who fought in World War II. And my family's been in southern Indiana since the Revolution or post-Revolution. So like Raz, I'm active in the DAR, and my ancestor Richard Williams also served. So family military history going back to that time. In contrast, my mother was born and raised in post-war Seoul, South Korea. She was born to a father who had served in the Korean Army, and she immigrated to the United States when she married my dad. So she was still in the process of gaining her citizenship when I was born, because it's a lengthy process. So that kind of makes me this special kind of all-American kid, I feel like, the one born to, into the family as a daughter of the American Revolution, but also born to a brand new immigrant citizen as well. As a result of my father's service, I had a nomadic childhood. I lived in places like Germany and South Korea as he navigated his career, and my mother, true to form, was a typical tiger mom. If you've ever read Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother, that was my mother to a T. She pushed me to perform academically. And then my dad, being a Hoosier and a sports fan, had me in basketball as soon as I could join a league. It wasn't until about halfway through high school that I really had any awareness of the United States Military Academy at West Point. When you grow up as an Army brat, you're kind of exposed to, like, your dad wears a uniform, and you think everybody's dad wears a uniform, and there wasn't a concept for me that that was something that I would or could ever do. And because my father was really miserable at West Point, he never talked about it. And so he would graduate in 1978 in the second to last all-male class at West Point. So he actually served as cadet cadre when the first group of women started their basic training, and I later got to meet the lady who was in his squad, and actually, had to listen to my dad for that summer. But I was invited to West Point for a summer program. They have these summer leadership seminars, and I then pursued a nomination to attend, to Dad's total surprise and delight. There was zero push from my family to go. I think more than anything, they were absolutely shocked that I was even interested. And 25 years after my dad graduated, I was dropped off at cadet basic training at West Point. I was not the best cadet. I think that I came in as a strong runner and an academic, but there was a lot of things that were new to me. One thing that struck me at West Point is it felt like a lot of the guys, because let's face it, was 85% guys from the start, they'd been preparing for West Point their whole lives. They were just socialized that way, and I never learned to shoot a rifle, even though my dad hunts. I didn't hike or camp much, and I didn't even know how to drive a stick shift car, and when I asked my dad about it, it was just one of those things where his reaction was like, well, I had 2 girls, I just didn't think about it. I didn't think about that stuff. And, you know, he's my hero, and I've followed in his footsteps, you know, every step of my life, but, you know, flash forward, and I'm a freshman cadet, and I don't know what the heck I'm doing. And I remember giving a tour of our newly remodeled gym to a group of women from the class of 1980, and this year, actually this July, marks 40 years ago that West Point first admitted women into their cadet basic trainings. The class of 1980 was the first. And they admitted 119 women, and 4 years later, only 62 of them would graduate. There were a lot of hiccups in those early years that resulted in that rate of attrition. For one, as the ladies tell me the story, so West Point is known for those full dress uniforms where it looks like you're a toy soldier, all the shiny buttons. And they had these tails. And somebody had the bright idea that if they admitted women to the academy and they had these coattails, the swish of those hips would be too distracting and it would be disruptive to military order and discipline. And so these first class of women were wearing high-waisted white trousers, you know, don't forget that. First class of women received full dress coats with no tails, which only accentuated what the academy was trying to avoid, emphasized exactly what they didn't want. So there were silly hiccups like that in the admission of women to the academy, but there were also some very real struggles. There was true animosity towards these women that I never really had to experience on the same level as a cadet. So in some ways I could almost understand my dad not talking to me about West Point, having witnessed what the first 2 years was like for those women that were admitted to the academy. And no doubt he prayed I wouldn't fall victim to some of the things that he witnessed them go through. So it was really only when I saw the first woman graduate from Ranger School, by the way, the first 3 have all been West Point graduates, I made the mistake of reading the online comments and op articles, and I think that I realized what it must have looked like back then when those women went to West Point, because it just seems like every time women blaze a trail in the military, there are naysayers and conspiracy theorists diminishing their accomplishments, and very sadly, it just kind of comes with the territory. So when I was asked to come here as a storyteller to an event with such an intimidating title as Women Groundbreakers, I was admittedly shy about it and wondered if I qualified to speak. And I realized that beginning with the class of 1980, less than 5,000 women have graduated from West Point in its over 200-year history. And I guess that makes me one of a few in the grand scheme of things, and it made it feel more important to talk about it. And it's funny to think about women at West Point as a separate group, as I was talking about a little bit earlier with someone, because during those 4 years, all you want to do is fit in and assimilate. I remember never wanting to stand out from the crowd, always wanting to be equals, and some of us girls even avoided wearing skirts entirely. It was frowned upon to wear your skirt because you need to stick to trousers so you look uniform like everybody else. So when I entered West Point in 2003, the year of the invasion, I honestly thought that would all be over by the time I graduated 4 years later. And instead, when I graduated in 2007, I found myself standing in Ramadi, Iraq, in Al Anbar, less than a year after I had gotten my diploma. And so during my 5 years of service, the 3rd Infantry Division in Fort Stewart, Georgia, I deployed twice to Iraq. The second deployment was for a full year in Baghdad. And I spent more time in combat during my 5 years of service than my dad did in 23 years of duty. So when I think about how this strings together, just kind of thinking about your lean-in group and thinking about Women Groundbreakers, it brings me to a conversation that I had with my Hamoni, my Korean grandmother. She was complaining to my mother, lamenting that my mother had 2 girls, that she didn't have any sons. Because in the Korean old-fashioned mentality is every family needs a son to take care of your elder family members. And I was listening to that and I'm like, you kidding me? I was like, really? I was like, she wishes my mom had a son. I went to West Point. I did everything that dad did, and you know, all these things. And so I told my mom, I was like, what more does she want? I mean, my grandparents were so excited that I graduated from West Point that they flew from LA to New York for that graduation. And so my mom pushed back a little, and then my grandma said, she thought about it, and then she looked at me, and she goes, okay, Aubrey is as good as a son. And I think that, you know, that sounds like a backhanded compliment to most of us in the room. When you think about it, and coming from someone else who might be right, but coming from my grandmother, who lived through the Japanese occupation and the Korean War and all of that, and in a society that viewed, things a little bit differently, that was the ultimate admission for me, that as a daughter, I was as good as that son. And so when you think about it, regardless of what decade we live in, women are still chipping away at the glass ceiling. I think every year a woman is the first to do something, and we're 50% of the population, but we're still jumping over hurdles that society has placed for us, and I don't want to see any more firsts. I want to see the beginning of the end of the first, where we've done everything that we needed to do to prove ourselves in the eyes of society. And it bothers me when I hear someone say that women may not belong in a combat zone or on the front line, or that society can't handle women in a certain role. And it makes me wonder why people think that to achieve something exceptional, we must have had special treatment or special circumstances. I read somewhere recently about the importance of teaching girls to be brave, not perfect. And it made me think a lot about my childhood. Yeah, it's a fantastic TED Talk if you haven't seen it. It's because that's what my mother pushed me, my parents pushed me my whole life to be perfect. There was not that emphasis on brave. I really could have used that at a lot of points in my life. And bravery means accepting risk and seeking greater reward, and perfection means fear of imperfection. And we're teaching girls to be afraid of risk, to settle what's safe and certain, and we're teaching boys to save and change the world, and it extends beyond the military environment. Men negotiate and women don't, and so on and so forth. And you all know this from reading books and articles and all that. But when I was in Iraq, I met this woman named Najat. And she was a contractor and an Iraqi war widow. She was a refugee in Jordan, where she went after her husband was killed. She took her daughters there. And she decided that she was going to earn a living because she needed to take care of her family by being a contractor in Iraq. Well, nobody would really let her in and gain a foothold. So she kind of did the unthinkable. While everybody was servicing the green zone, which was a relatively safer area, she went in and started servicing the red zone, the dangerous area. And it was when she did that, that's when she found success. She became one of the most successful contractors that I'd met there, and one of the only women, she was packed too, everywhere she went, she was ready to take on the world. I just realized that she was one of those successful and courageous women who had spent her whole life being raised to be the perfect mom, housewife, and all of that. And in the face of adversity, she had to be brave. And so I think that it's refreshing to me to meet people like Najat in my travels, to be exposed to things like this and women at West Point, and have a new generation of girls growing up a little bit differently than I did. Because you look at some of my favorite characters from like Hermione from Harry Potter, or Katniss Everdeen from The Hunger Games, or Merida from Brave, and we have a long way to go, but they get to grow up with role models like that. And for me, at this stage in my life, it is enough for me to hear my grandmother say that she recognizes my worth. But the next step is for my own children someday to know their own worth without those limits. Because we really do need to treat our daughters as if they're as good as our sons, and understand that they are magnificent simply in their ability to be brave and not just perfect.
Before I say anything, I would like for you all to give another round of applause to the